Hey everyone, Mr. MC here. This is a lap guide for the newish lap time challenge taking place at Red Bull Ring with the Porsche Mission X. So this online time trial event is over on sport mode, so make sure you have menu booking number 9 completed so you can access this event along with any other online time trials. So this is a 2-week event ending towards the end of December 4th, 2024, where we're using a Porsche Mission X on the racing soft tires. And no, you cannot tune your car. I mean, you can't really tune this car to begin with. But anyways, your goal is to get within the 3% time range of the world record time when the event ends, and hopefully you get the 2 million credits. And as we start the lap guide, I do have traction control set to 1 because this car loves to generate a lot of wheel spin and I want to try to get rid of some of that. As you start your lap, you can brake before the Austrian flag on the left ends, and you want to try to get the car straightened up as soon as you can. That way you can go back to full throttle power. And do be aware that this car is an electric vehicle, so there's no shift point or anything like that. But with this car, you do need to brake pretty early, which is why for turn number 1, you're going to brake just before the 200 meter board. This is just before the grass on the left ends, just before the curb on the left starts. Use all of your braking power and brake in a straight line. I try not to go too much onto the curves because that can potentially increase my braking zone, as that will make the ABS go haywire. I start to turn in just as I reach the 50 meter board, and as I'm turning in, I start to ease off of the brakes, and as I hit the apex, I slowly apply a throttle and I try to get the car straightened up as soon as it can so I can go back to full throttle power. Now, Tijani did make a really good note that when you're about to reach 100 miles per hour, that's when you want to go at full throttle power. That way, it reduces the chances of getting any unnecessary wheel spin. And if you get that unnecessary wheel spin, that can cost you some time. Now, normally I don't use shadows as braking markers, but because the time is at time 0, so time is not moving, I'm going to use this particular shadow as my cue to start to brake. So just as I pass it, I'm going to use all of my braking power. So I'm using all my braking power, trying to brake in a straight line as possible, and I'm not going to dip onto the curves on the left because every now and then, if I dip too early onto the curves, that makes the ABS go haywire. It makes my brakes not as good, and I end up going off track. Now, you can use the track marshals on the left as your cue to turn on in. So go ahead and start to ease off of the brakes as you're turning in. So doing a bit of trail braking. I do coast for a very brief moment, so no braking, no throttle input, and this is to let the car turn in just a little bit more. But just as I hit the apex, that's where I start to gradually get back on the throttle, and I'm trying to be really careful with my throttle input, even with traction control, to try not to get too much wheel spin. And just as I'm about to hit 100 miles per hour, that's when I start to use all of my throttle input. Now here you want to brake before the 200 meter board, before the curb on the left starts, and I would say to brake even just a little bit earlier. That way you can hit the apex, because here I go a bit wide. Now, just as the curb on the left is about to end, that's where you start to turn on in and slowly ease off of the brakes. I do coast for a moment on this particular turn to let the car turn in a bit more. And you want to be really careful getting back on the throttle, as it's really easy for the car to generate wheel spin over here and potentially make you lose control. Then bring yourself towards the right, and here I brake late again, and you want to brake right as the curb on the right is just about to start. So here I brake just a smidge too late, and that is going to cause me to go just a little bit wide. Turn in as you reach the 50 meter board, and as you're turning in, you can start to ease off of the brakes as you're turning in. So you're doing a bit of trail braking. You can let the car coast for a moment over here as well, so you can let the car rotate just a little bit more. Nice and careful getting back on the throttle. Brake before the green or teal area on the right ends. Full braking power for a very brief moment, and start to ease off of the brakes as you're turning in. And you want to try to hug this left turn, and just as you're about to hit the apex, you do see me dab on the throttle just a little bit, and this is more to try to get a bit of rotation on the car, because I want to get the car straightened up right about here. That way I can go back to full throttle power as soon as I can. Now I'm going to go ahead and bring myself towards the left, because I'm going to brake just as I reach this little building that is on the left. And because I'm going to go downhill in just a moment, I do need to brake pretty early, which is why I'm braking right here. I'm going to use the 50 meter board as my turn-in point. So right here, I'm going to start to turn in and slowly ease off of the brakes. It's really easy to overshoot this turn, so again, you need to make sure that you brake pretty early. Now, nice and careful getting back on the throttle. And for the final turn, again, brake before the Austrian flag on the left ends. And I'll be turning in before the curb on the left ends. And again, just let the car coast for just a moment. That way the car can turn in a bit more. Focus on getting the car straightened up. That way you can go back to full throttle power. And that's going to end the lap. So we'll go through this again, but this time I am not going to stop the video. So I'm going to take it from the very beginning just to show you how I go about the final turn when I'm getting ready to start a new lap. So again, get the car straightened up and then get back to full throttle power. And turn number 1 is a bit tricky because turn number 1 is a bit bumpy as well. So you have to be really careful with your throttle input. That way you don't risk spinning out. So my priority for turn number 1 is just trying to get the car straightened up and then get back on the throttle. This turn, I do use that shadow that the sign makes. I know it's not the best braking point, especially if time is moving, but because time is not moving, I'm going to go ahead and use it. And again, coming out of these hairpins, got to be really careful getting back on the throttle so I don't get too much wheel spin. That little bit of wheel spin can cost me some time. Worst case scenario, it spins me out. Again, also here, this one's also pretty tricky because you're going through a turn and you're trying to get the car straightened up so you can get back to full throttle power. And for this particular turn, I did overshoot the braking zone by just a little bit, so you got to brake just a little bit earlier. Don't forget that this car has a really big braking zone, so you do need to make sure that you brake pretty early for these turns, especially the really hard braking zones where you're slowing down to a near stop. Or if you're going downhill, you got to brake early for these turns as well, just like these two. Brake nice and early, focus on getting the car straightened up, and then use all of your throttle power. So we'll go through this one more time, but this time in bumper cam, and just like in the last one, I'm going to go ahead and bring it from the very beginning. And yeah, this is a pretty tricky car. It's an electric vehicle, and at least to me, it felt a lot harder to try to get a good feel for the car, especially because I do rely on sound to kind of get an idea if I can get back on the throttle or not. Or sometimes I just find it hard for me to get a good feel if it's okay to get back on full throttle power, because I spun out a lot of times thinking it was okay for me to be back on full throttle power when in reality it wasn't. And again, these kind of turns, got to be really careful getting back on the throttle. You can see my throttle input just being really careful to make sure I don't get too much wheel spin, because a lot of my laps got ruined at that particular hairpin. Same goes with this one. This one is also pretty tricky because you are still turning as you're trying to get back on full throttle power. So again, throttle control is really important here. Even if you have traction control on, you want to make sure that you have some throttle control. And brake before the teal area on the right ends. And here again, you got to be really careful with your throttle input. It's really easy to be back on full throttle power just a bit too early and you end up spinning out. And you are going downhill for these last two turns, so make sure you brake nice and early. Let the car, or get the car straightened up, and then get back on full throttle power. And with that, I was just shy of entering the 120 range, but this Laptime challenge, or well, this car kind of annoyed me, so I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna call it a day. But that's all for this lap guide. Hopefully this lap guide helped you out, and if you like this video, you can press a like, subscribe, and all the good stuff. So this is Mr. CA. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.